Hey my duck YouTube, and welcome back to a new video with Rams Fan YT. In today's video we will be looking at my predictions for the upcoming Premier League season. Yes, the top flight of English football. Always an interesting league to see who comes out on top, and who gets relegated and who gets Europe. As ever, leave your predictions down below about who you think is going to finish where. Who are going to be the surprise upsets of the season, overachieving, who's going to underachieve, let me know. Right, let's get straight into this video with 20th, Ipswich Town. The ascent of this club has been rapid, maybe a bit too rapid one could say, as the Premier League as it is notorious for how difficult it is for newly promoted Championship clubs. And with back-to-back promotions, the difficulty is that some of the squad will be very out of depth in the Premier League. Now, I'm not saying every player is instantly going to be somebody who is out of depth, but some of them will be. This is certainly not actually meant to be a dig at Kieran McKenna's ability as a manager. In fact, I strongly rate him as a manager, and I think in the long term he can bring Ipswich lots of success. But I also don't think the signings are for survival, but for a bit of a longer term plan. We can see that. Amari Hutchinson, who was on loan, is only 20 years old and showed his potential last season with the Tractor Boys and just how good he is. Ben Johnson is 24 and rotational players over the last few years at West Ham. Jacob Greaves was the best centre-back in the Championship last season and was Hull's player of the season, and he's only 23. Liam Delap, son of a famous Rory Delap, of course, is still only 21 and already shown so much ability for a man of his age. And Muric, who is only 25, which is young for a goalkeeper, but has already made 38 appearances for the cost of a national side. You can just see that sort of blueprint of a side. It reminds me a little bit of Luton, maybe a bit of one or two steps before, but certainly a side which makes signings for the future, but aren't going to do too well this season. 19th, Leicester City. Okay, so I hear people saying, because the Foxes spent so long in the Premier League last time, they will inevitably spend a long time again. This, my friends, is rarely the case. I think we don't need to look any further back than Burnley last season for that same story. Burnley spent ages in the Premier League under Sean Dyche. They were then relegated, came straight back up under Vincent Kompany, and then straight back down again. That being here for a long time means absolutely nothing. And I think the squad as well, if you look at it, is very similar last time to the one that went down. I'm really not impressed by the signing so far. And let's not forget that Enzo Maresca, who brought the success last season, has left for Chelsea. And he has been replaced with Steve Cooper. And we all know that Cooper Ball doesn't really work in the Premier League, with his time at Forest being constantly in a relegation battle, despite hundreds of millions of pounds in transfer fees and incredible talent brought into that squad. He just couldn't lift them out of that relegation tussle. And I think with Leicester, which has arguably even a weaker squad, they are going to struggle. 18th, Southampton. Russell Martin plays a heavy possession style of football, which is successful in the Championship, but cannot possibly work in the Premier League. Why? Because the Saints won't have a lot of possession in the top flight. I mean, they're coming in as the underdog. Teams won't respect them as much as they do in the Championship. And ultimately, I actually think his style of play is very boring. I've never been so bored in my life than when he was at Swansea and there was a game against Derby and I was generally falling asleep for around about 70 minutes because of how boring the game was. They've made numerous changes in a vain hope that they can stay up. Shea Adams and Stuart Armstrong are both good strikers whose ability haven't been replaced, although I do rate Ben Raritan Diaz coming in. He's certainly a good striker at this level, and, well, definitely the level below, but we'll see at this level. And Lallana, Taylor and Harwood Bellis, definitely probably this level. But I do think in a very strong Premier League this season, we're talking about one of the strongest Premier Leagues in quite a fair few years, I think they will struggle. 17th, Brentford. This team has slowly been going backwards over the last few seasons, and I reckon they'll only just stay up this season. Thomas Frank I have mixed views on. On the one hand, he's one of the greatest managers in the top four leagues. On the other hand, last season, he made a lot of mistakes. And I mean a lot. They were quite poor in parts last season. So I think he'll struggle this season if he hasn't learned from last season. And they hardly have made any signings, which means they'll probably go backwards, only marginally, but have just enough to stay up. 16th, West Ham United. I'm not convinced that Julian Lopetegui. I think he's a snake who isn't that good of a manager. And at West Ham, whose squad has been assembled entirely by David Moyes this entire time for the last few seasons, fair few years now, isn't it? Going back, crikey. So I don't think Lopetegui basically won't have that instant success. And I think the season will probably be quite a long one. West Ham often have mixed spells of form as well, as it is. I think this season will probably be a struggle for the Hammers with the loss of Ben Rama. Obviously, some of the signings this window have come in to the London Stadium that do ring a really aspirational club. You've got Wes Foderingham, although he did get relegated last season with the biggest amount of goals conceded of any goalkeeper for years. Max Kilman, good centre-back, although he did also get relegated with Burnley. Somerville, who was at Leeds in the Championship, and I think he also may have got relegated when Leeds did get relegated. And Fulkrug, who I've heard a lot of good things said about him. But they're all used to playing a host of formations and styles of play. Sheffield United had a very different style of play from Leeds United, and they had a different style of play again to Burnley. I just think overall this squad and a new manager, that would take a while to click. So they'll avoid relegation comfortably, but I don't think much more than that. 15th, Nottingham Forest. Most of you probably thought I'd put Forest as 20th. Well, joke's on you, because this season I'm doing serious predictions. No Tottenham in relegation zone either. Yeah, I still think they will do poor, but at least they palmed off one of the causes for being so poor to Leicester, and instead have brought in a relatively experienced Premier League manager in Nuno Espirito Santo, but I don't think we will see him do what he did in Wolverhampton. Partly because that project took absolutely years, of which Forest just frankly won't give him. I am, however, not convinced on any of the signings as of yet, and only think they will stay up because they've been in the Premier League for a few seasons and know how to grind out results. But I do hope I'm wrong and that they are relegated. 14th, Fulham. Over the last few seasons, Fulham have really impressed me with their ability to get results, enough to be clear of a relegation pack really, and I think they will do a similar thing this season. They've kept the architect of this success, Marco Silva, and yes, they have lost Polina, who arguably was their best player last season, and I don't think they've adequately replaced him, but I do think the signings of Emile Smith-Rowe and Ryan Sessegnon are certainly impressive. And if they get a defensive midfielder and a backup goalkeeper in by the end of the transfer window, and I think a mid-table place will certainly be where they finish. 13th, Crystal Palace. Yes, I obviously rate Crystal Palace's squad quite highly. You only need to look at last season's predictions to think that. However, I did overestimate the squad, and realistically they'll probably finish mid-table as usual. Oliver Glasner did a phenomenal job with Palace last season. He won 53% of his games in charge. However, with that sort of form, it is inevitable a bigger club will come calling. Or maybe even England's national team, I've heard faint cries of. What I'm trying to say is he won't stay the whole season, so he may start very well, but come the end of the season with a different manager, they'll still do decent, but probably finish mid-table. You already need to look at the transfer window. Michael Olise is already a considerable loss, hence why they won't be as high as last season. But Sarr is an interesting signing who has been impressive in the Premier League historically with Watford. So yeah, in total, probably mid-table finish, which some say may be a poor finish for a team which contains 3 England internationals now. 12th, Everton. Now, most predictions so far have been tame for my standards. Well, not this one with some people. I mean, I'm reckoning a lot of people are probably putting the Toffees as firm favourites for relegation, right? But if we remove the points deduction from last season, they finished in 12th place. So realistically, all I'm doing is predicting them to be as good as they were last season. And why shouldn't they be? It's very unlikely Sean Dyche would leave Everton, assuming he lives in the northwest, and there's no other team in the region in that market for a manager of the style of Dyche. You see the likes of Liverpool, a couple of Manchester clubs are too high, and the other clubs, he won't go back to Burnley. Um, Sheffield United he hates. It's unlikely he's going to go to Leeds because I don't think Leeds would appoint him. They don't really like his philosophy. As you can tell, probably, and then other than that, you're really looking at bang average championships teams, which will probably, no offence to the likes of Preston and Blackburn, um, or Huddersfield, or people like in League One and Blackpool, and so they're all good teams, but they're not going to be able to get Dyche. So he's not going to go anywhere. Is what I'm trying to say. And for the first season I can remember, I think they've actually managed to abide by FFP, although I did hear rumours that they get a fine. But this transfer window, rather than, they've actually done on the right side of FFP. And they've still made key signings like Andai and O'Brien. Obviously Godfrey and Anana are players that will be missed. But overall, they haven't really lost any real quality in their departures. So mid-table isn't as unrealistic as others may probably have you believe. 11th, Chelsea. Okay, so this isn't actually as mental as people would inevitably say, because for the majority of last season they were a mid-table outfit. In this precise position, it was only they were 11th and that like almost entire season. Do you not remember? Like people were saying, how have Chelsea not moved out of 11th till probably February time? And then they had a late surge, which took them into the European positions in 6th. So what is the reward that Pochettino got for that? Well, it was essentially sacked in all but names. It was like, yeah, we appreciate what you've done. Can you leave now without making a fuss? And that's what happened. They then brought in a manager in Maresca, who, yes, was good in the Championship, but he's unproven in the Premier League. I mean, have they learnt absolutely nothing from the appointment of Frank Lampard? Anyway, the pre-season has looked poor, so I reckon a long season with a clear focus on youngsters being brought into the first team to clearly sell on. The transfer window is baffling with me. You bring in Kellyman for Ziyech, Dewsbury Hall for Hutchinson, Wiley for Lewis Hall, and Anselmino, I think it's how you pronounce it, for Thiago Silva. This all just feels like a downgrade and therefore a bit of regression to mid-table. 10th, Brighton and Hove Albion. This team seems always to be on the cusp of Europe, and yes, they did once get it, but I don't think they will this time round. But I think overall it will probably be a good season for the Seagulls. One reason I don't think Europe is likely is Fabian Herzler will take time to adapt to this league. But he's just had 2 phenomenal seasons for St. Pauli, so we will see how his philosophy does adapt to this league. I think he could be quite a good manager. Brighton always seem to pluck one out, don't they? As usual, I've not heard of any of the signings, but I'm sure after a brief period of acclimatisation, they will be firing on full cylinders and propelled to a solid upper mid-table European challengers. Yeah. 9th, Wolverhampton Wanderers. Why can't this side finish top half? Gary O'Neill so far has done a semi-decent job with Wolves, finishing mid-table last season, and I think 9th would probably be a bit of natural progression. Tommy Doyle and Rodrigo Gomez are both good signings. I think they are young, but also technically very good players. More importantly, only Max Kilman has left. Did I say he was at Burnley? Oh, sorry, he was at Wolves. I could have sworn he was at Burnley at some point. Anyway, would be detrimental to the squad, but their defence is already a vastly superior defence to any of the other mid-table sides, in my personal opinion, when they're on song. In previous years, definitely. Let's not remember when they used to have, what was it? You know, that Portuguese goalkeeper, which wasn't Jose Salva one before. Anyway, that guy did a phenomenal job, and they'll probably find a Portuguese centre-back somewhere who will be better than Kilman and restore that defensive ability. Yeah. 8th, Liverpool. Now this probably seems an incredibly stupid prediction to make, but we got to consider how much of a pillar Klopp was to Liverpool. He was really the main man that centred around him. He will go down in history as the same regard as Shankly did, or someone of his sort of ilk. So yeah, like when Bielsa left Leeds, for example, the whole fan base criticised everything the successor did just because it wasn't the same as the way he did it. Well, I think the same will probably happen at Liverpool. Arne Slot needs time to get used to the Premier League, and we saw last season that Dutch managers aren't a roaring success in their first season in England. I mean, just look at Erik ten Hag. The bitter rivals Manchester United finished 8th last season in a very similar style of play. Every poor performance will have the frustration of a large fan base with massive expectations. The defence has been weakened as well, losing Matip and Thiago, and so far no signings have come in at all when I'm recording this, which is probably a week and a bit, about half a week or so. I can't remember. It'll be on Friday, and I'm doing it on the Sunday. But none of them players have come in yet. And Liverpool just seem to have players which are just injury prone, and I don't know whether that was because Klopp worked them very hard or whether they're just naturally injury prone. However, all of saying that, and a poor season by all things, I do think they'll still win the FA Cup. They're just too big of a club not to get some silverware. 7th, Aston Villa. Last season was unbelievable for Villa. But let's be realistically, they surely cannot replicate that performance for a second season. And I think a 7th place finish is still good and much more realistic. It's where they finished 2 seasons ago, and their ability is maybe going to be about there after this transfer window. Emery is obviously a very good manager to have at that club, and actually seems content to be with the club, not wanting to move to a bigger one, which is quite surprising. They have made a lot of signings, but several are not what I would consider Champions League standard. I mean, Cameron Archer, Lewis Dobbin, Ian Matson, Ross Barkley, Philogene and Onana. Yes, they are great investments for the future, barring Barkley, of course, but are probably only good enough on paper to finish 7th this season. And they have lost Douglas Luiz and Moussa Diaby, and they're quite big losses. It's probably a slightly worse season, ending in 7th, but still a very respectable season. 6th, AFC Bournemouth. Now this is a bit of a mental call, but last season they were a solid mid-table side, and I just see this team is currently going from strength to strength. I mean, Iola, I'm not trying to pronounce that, and the trajectory that man has taken this club on, I just see it quite likely that they can finish Europe. I mean, the only problem is, of course, the desperate need for an expansion to that stadium. I mean, at the current level they are and the size of Bournemouth, they probably need to double that stadium to probably about 20k. It would make much, much more sense. But that's not what we're here for. I'm just thinking that you look at the momentum that they've got. They can pull out a surprise. Like when Eddie Howe was with Bournemouth, he provided a surprise result as well. And it's just one of them clubs which can do that. So I don't think 6th is as mental as some people will say. 5th, Manchester United. 8th was definitely an underperformance for a club of that size and magnitude. All credit for sticking with the manager, to be fair, because he did bring silverware in the form of the FA Cup. And realistically, now he does know the Premier League, he can make adaptations to his style of play. I reckon a solid 5th place finish is more reasonable for this club and shows a natural progression. What Manchester United have done, which must be applauded this transfer window, is made a huge amount of bravery to remove that dead wood. Martial, Donny van der Beek, Mason Greenwood, which shouldn't even be a player anymore, Brandon Williams, Raphael Varane, they all needed to move, and that was something which had needed to happen for a while, was removing that dead wood, and they have done that. Obviously they haven't brought in proper quality to replace it yet, but the squad was already bloated and full of egos, which I think was the main problem we've seen over the last few seasons. It's what we're constantly hearing. And the transfer window instills a mentality of that no one is bigger than the club. And that is a mentality you really need to have, especially at a club like Manchester United, where nobody is bigger than the club. Because Manchester United have arguably, after Real Madrid, probably the 2nd biggest club in the world in history terms. So yeah, I definitely think they'll go in the right direction. 4th, Newcastle United. We all knew that this club would take time to be competitive at the top end of the table. I mean, when they were taken over by the Saudis, it wasn't an overnight fix. But a 4th place finish, I think, is fair. They finished 4th 2 seasons ago, and now they actually don't have a distraction of Europe, which was they finished 7th last season and did have an injury crisis as well. So I think this season will be a definite improvement because they've got some of their key players back from injury and no distractions. Eddie Howe's also made it very clear to the media that he plans to stay firmly where he is at Newcastle right now, and with a size of fan base and stadium that the Geordies have, they've got to do well this season, surely. Third, Tottenham Hotspur. This club always seems to do very well for almost an inexplicable reason. And much like Manchester United, I just said, they have cleared out the deadwood, which has made the club lower than they probably should be over the last few seasons. Players like Eric Dyer, Perisic, Sessegnon, Ndombele, Joe Rodon, is it Joe Rodon? Rodon anyway, and Højbjerg. Some of the smartest transfers that have happened this season is the loan market. Taking in Timo Werner on loan instead of signing him permanently is a no-risk signing. They've loaned a player with a sign-on clause, so if he can perform, then they have dibs to sign the player. If he fails, well, he's not attached to the club either. Now, we know Werner can be a bit hit and miss, but I do think he should be reverted back to a winger in a narrow 4-3-3 formation, as he was in his youth. Archie Gray, as well, is obviously a highly rated player, so he'll probably be drip-fed into the squad as well. And also think we'll get the monkey of no trophy off their back and win the EFL Cup because, I don't know, lol, Harry Kane left and Spurs finally win a trophy. It'd just be too funny. Second, Arsenal. Arteta is a manager who clearly has a good philosophy. However, he's just nearly manager, I want to say. I don't think that's being unfair. He failed to get the cup from major success as of yet. He has only won the FA Cup. And obviously, don't disrespect, I love the FA Cup competition. I think it's amazing. I just don't think that it's good enough to win the title. I think as long as Pep is in charge of Manchester City, Man City will win the league. I do rate the transfer window so far though. They released Cedric Suarez and Mohamed Elneny and instead brought in David Raya permanently, who is an incredible goalkeeper in my opinion. Took out Smith Rowe, who was clearly not getting into the Gunners squad, and got a good fee for him. So I think overall, a good transfer window so far. Could probably do with a few more signings. Arteta board as well is good enough to get second, just not enough to overtake Manchester City for me. So obviously, first we've got Manchester City. Every season this club wins the league. It gets boring to predict them, it really does. As I already said in this video, Pep Guardiola is a master of winning, so will win the Premier League again. He's the best manager in the Premier League. He is one of the best managers in Europe. It's probably between him and Carlo Ancelotti at the moment. You know, it's been a quiet transfer window when only one signing has been made at City, and that's just reflective of the whole Premier League transfer window. But I think I'm going to be boring, much like this transfer window has been, and say that Man City will win the league. I'm sorry, guys. I've done exciting before, and I get slated for it. But thank you very much, everyone, for watching this video. Please subscribe if you're new around here. We've had so many subscribers. I want to thank you all for subscribing if you have in recent days. Leave your predictions down below. We've got some score predictions coming up on my channel as well for tiers 1 down to 6. I did quite well last week's before the Premier League season started. I got around about almost 40 points, which isn't too bad. I think it's a 1 point for a draw and 3 points. 1 point for the right win, draw. You predicted the right outcome. It's 3 points if you get the exact right score prediction. So say you predicted, the day I'm recording, you take for example Sheffield Wednesday to win 4-0 against Plymouth, then you would win all 3 points. Or if you just predicted Sheffield Wednesday to win, like I did, I predicted Sheffield Wednesday to win 1-0, I get 1 point for that. So if you want to join along, please put your thoughts in them videos. It'd be really interesting to see how everybody gets along. Just a bit of friendly competition, you know. But it's been great waffling to you guys today, and I'll see you all in the next video.